Russia is betting its entire invasion strategy on a relic of the past: armored trains. Steel beasts that look like they belong in a World War II museum are now shuttling troops, tanks, and ammunition across Ukraine's front lines. Putin is counting on them to keep his war machine alive. But Ukraine just turned one of those behemoths into a smoldering wreck, crippling Russia's logistics and sending a clear message: your so-called unstoppable juggernauts, we can stop them. And that's only the beginning. What Ukraine is planning next could derail Russia's entire war effort. But before we get there, what is Russia doing using armored trains in 2025? In this day and age, using armored trains might seem like an antiquated concept that's better left behind in the Soviet era, when trucks, aerial transport, and similar options are all available. And if you were looking at a Western military, you would probably be right. While the US military still uses trains to transport equipment, it's not sending those trains into active war zones or relying on them to keep its military functioning. Russia is different. It always has been. United 24 Media made that clear in a June 29th piece in which author Ivan Komenko wrote about how Russia has reintroduced legacy rail platforms to its ongoing operations. Why? Well, Russia needs to maintain its supply lines and shuttle equipment needed to repair the infrastructure that Ukraine has been damaging with its deep drone strikes. Komenko notes that these types of trains were first developed during the late 19th century and saw widespread use right up until World War II. After that war, the Western world moved on from the concept. Russia didn't. The country maintains a small fleet of massive armored trains, which are almost like steel juggernauts that traverse its vast terrain. The trains are mobile, semi-protected, and Russia relies on them to keep its rear-line operations running. There's the Baikal, which is based in Russia's eastern military district and is used for infrastructure repair and route inspection. The Amur roams the southern military district, packed with twin anti-aircraft guns and machine guns while offering an armed escort for Russia's other supply chains. In the central military district, the Terik owns the tracks, a train that's configured for troop movement, reconnaissance, and medical evacuations. But the jewel in the outdated train crown is the Yenisey. That train is vital because it's operating inside occupied Ukraine, making it the one armored train that offers a frontline target to Ukraine, and on the surface, it's a dangerous prospect. In June, Defense Express reported that the Yenisey is currently marauding around Pokrovsk, which is a key city in the ongoing fight in the Donbass. Pokrovsk's geographic location makes it a vital logistics base and transport hub for Ukraine, as it connects Ukraine's rear forces to its active fighters in Donetsk. The city is also within touching distance of the Donetsk administrative border, meaning if Russia takes Pokrovsk, it's in the perfect position to take the rest of Donetsk. Putin wants Pokrovsk. That's why he's dedicated 110,000 soldiers to taking the city as part of his ongoing summer offensive. That brings us back to the Yenisey. Defense Express says that the train serves several purposes near the front lines in Donetsk. It's able to support Russian repair missions and provide security for Russia's other logistical convoys, it says. Russia is even using the Yenisey to conduct reconnaissance. Plus, Putin has turned the train into a fighting force, equipping it with weaponry that allows it to defend itself and other trains. Among those weapons is a BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle. While that may seem like a strange choice for a train-based weapon, the BMP-2 isn't driving around the Yenisey's flatbeds. Instead, the vehicle is welded in place onto one of those flatbeds, giving the train's crew the option of mounting the vehicle's powerful guns to attack any Ukrainian soldiers or drones that attempt to come near. Also among the Yenisey's munitions are a Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft gun, which is a twin-barreled monster that can shoot down drones and any Ukrainian aircraft that happen to pass overhead. The train also has turrets designed for use with heavy machine guns, such as the Soviet-era NSV Utayos gun. A Soviet-era weapon for a Soviet-era train seems apt. But it's clear from the transformation of the Yenisey that Russia is still trying to blend the old with the somewhat semi-new with its armored trains. Still, there's no escaping the simple fact: armored trains are outdated in modern warfare. That brings us to the obvious question: why is Russia still using them? Journalist and former multi-branch soldier in the US military Wes O'Donnell outlines the basic reason. The Yenisey's main job isn't to impress the home audience, although it does, but to keep the wheels of Russian logistics rolling in the absolute worst conditions imaginable, he says. Army recognition backs this point up. It says in a 2024 piece that it's unsurprising that Russia is using armored trains both at home and in Ukraine. After all, Ukraine is home to a vast railway network, much of which was built during the Soviet era, that spans from the Luhansk region all the way to Russian-occupied Crimea. In fact, Ukraine has the 13th largest rail network in the entire world, with its tracks sprawling for 12,295 miles. When you consider that, Russia's use of armored trains in 2025 doesn't seem so strange. Ukraine has the tracks that those trains need to operate. They're relics of an era when Russia owned Ukraine. and they provide Putin's forces with logistical arteries that allow for transportation of troops and equipment. But simply taking advantage of what's already inside Ukraine isn't the only reason Russia relies on armored trains. There's also the perception of these trains in the collective Russian psyche to consider. O'Donnell says that many in Russia seem to believe that their vast armored trains are close to unstoppable. Armored trains seem about as relevant as deploying knights on horseback into offensive combat, he says. But in Moscow's calculus, armored trains make a weird kind of sense. They can't be easily ambushed, they can shrug off small arms fire. And with a little creative engineering, they double as a mobile fortress. Therein lies the point. Russia has practical purposes for using its armored trains, but it also wants them to serve as a symbol of its desired dominance over Ukraine. Its trains are massive metal monsters that are constantly chugging along, reminding Ukraine's troops that all of its attacks inside Russia haven't stopped Putin from sending supplies and soldiers to the front lines. For the Russians, the psychological effect is just as important as the physical one, O'Donnell adds. Trains are a symbol of reach, permanence, and in this case, a message of don't even think about trying to blow up our supply line. But there are cracks in the image that Russia is trying to convey with its armored trains. Russia has over 20,000 locomotives in total, most of which aren't armored. But as with the very concept of using armored trains in the first place, most of the locomotives are old. Many date back to the Soviet era, with O'Donnell noting that most of Russia's mainline trains have engines that are between 20 and 35 years old. Those trains are often patched up with whatever spare parts Russia can get its hands on, revealing that its vast rail network, while not crumbling, certainly isn't as powerful as Putin wants it to appear. It definitely isn't the unstoppable juggernaut Russia claims it to be, and Ukraine just proved it. On June 8th, Newsweek reported that Ukraine had managed to destroy one of Russia's key locomotives. The news was announced by the country's Southern Defense Force as an attack that places massive pressure on Russia's logistics and supply chain inside Ukraine. RBC Ukraine provides more details, noting that the train Ukraine took out was carrying over 100 armored and automotive vehicles, along with 13 tanks that were being transported to the front lines. Ukraine even announced the strike in a Facebook post, stating, "The defense forces of southern Ukraine hit a locomotive with a column of enemy equipment. The enemy's losses amounted to 13 tanks and more than 100 units of armored and automotive equipment. The unstoppable force has just been stopped in an attack that the National Security Journal says was one of the most consequential strikes on Russian military transport in months." There are no more details about how Ukraine carried out the attack. It seems unlikely that it used drones to derail the Russian train, though it's possible. Perhaps a missile or an artillery strike. We simply don't know, but the how almost doesn't matter. What does matter is that this single train strike has shattered the Russian perception of the effectiveness of its armored trains. The massive metal monsters that were supposed to be unstoppable have now turned into targets. Ukraine took out a Russian train once. That means it'll be able to do it again. And therein lies a problem for Russia, which brings us to what Ukraine now targeting Russia's trains really means for the future of the war. The main issue Putin now has is that Ukraine is trying to choke Russia's logistical arteries. We've already touched on how massive Russia's rail network is, along with how that reliance on rail extends into Ukraine. Irregular warfare expands on this point, claiming that Russia's military strategy is entirely dependent on its massive rail networks. The rails sustain Putin's huge logistics efforts, enabling the large-scale combat operations we've seen throughout the war. In other words, without trains, Russia can't keep its troops supplied. And without supplies, the attacks those troops launch against Ukrainian defenses become weaker and easier to repel. O'Donnell adds to this, noting that Ukraine's destruction of one of Russia's armored trains has sent a clear message to Russia. One locomotive later, and the message was clear: if you build it, we will blow it up. He says that Ukraine's new focus on Russia's trains is part of a deliberate campaign designed to cut off Russia's logistical networks, forcing Moscow to fight harder, wait longer, and pay more for every bullet and bandage that makes it to the front. And he has a point. Whenever Ukraine manages to hit a train, it causes delays for Russia on the front line. That leaves Russia's military commanders facing difficult choices. Do they wait until another train rolls in, allowing Ukraine to reinforce its defenses against an upcoming attack? Or does the attack get launched, only to get cut down because Russia's soldiers don't have what they need to succeed? Neither option is ideal, as both lead to yet more attrition of a military that has already lost over 1 million troops and is bleeding equipment left, right, and center. Something else will worry Putin. The vastness of Russia's rail network, which the Russian leader has long seen as a key advantage, has become a liability now that Ukraine has proven it can hit Russia's trains. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine ranks 13th in the world for the size of its rail network. Russia's is even larger, with over 75,000 miles of railway. Russia has the world's third largest network, only coming behind China and the US, and those rails see constant use. Riddle says that Russia's railways account for 46% of the country's cargo turnover per year. Remove gas and oil pipelines from the equation, and that percentage rises to 87%. Most of Russia's national market is connected by rail, with roads serving as a support system rather than the primary means of transportation. Again, this shows how vital railways are to Russia. It also explains why the country is so focused on its outdated armored trains. But that vastness is now becoming a problem, as noted by both O'Donnell and Irregular Warfare. The sheer size and nature of Russia's rail infrastructure make it an ideal target for Ukrainian sabotage operations, claims Irregular Warfare. Unlike dispersed roadways, railway networks are relatively centralized, with key nodes, bridges, and junctions acting as choke points, it says. Understanding this, Ukrainian special operators and intelligence services operating by, with, and through various Russian resistance groups have strategically located these key nodes to great effect. The June strike may have made headlines, but the reality seems to be that Ukraine's special forces operatives have been working behind the scenes to scuttle Putin's use of railways throughout the war. Every mile of track is a potential target, O'Donnell adds. Partisans, saboteurs, and drone operators all have their pick of targets. And as Russia pushes deeper into Ukrainian territory, square kilometer by square kilometer, those lines get longer, more exposed, and harder to defend. That's an interesting point. Putin's summer offensive is designed to stretch the front lines, with the Russian leader's logic seeming to be that he wants to stretch what he sees as a weakening Ukrainian army. But to do that, Putin has to take a massive risk. His push into Ukraine leaves his railways and the armored trains hurtling along them more exposed than ever before. Ukraine could start hitting this ever-expanding target harder, which creates a dilemma for Russia. After all, a deeper push into Ukraine isn't going to work if the trains shuttling the supplies for that push are being stopped in their tracks. Still, that won't be enough to stop Putin from following his strategy through to its inevitable conclusion. After all, he sees Russia's rails in the same way as he sees the country's military: vast, massive, so enormous that Russia can afford to lose trains because there will always be another one waiting in the wings. That echoes his approach to the war itself, which has seen him create a meat grinder in Ukraine, in which seemingly endless human waves grind down Ukraine's defenses until Russia finally overcomes. Russia always has more, whether it's people or trains. Or does it? Ukraine isn't going to destroy Russia's entire rail network. It might not even be able to take out the small fleet of armored trains that are supporting the dozens of smaller and less protected trains that are making their way through both Russia and Ukraine. But what it can do is hit Russia's rails often, raising the cost of keeping them operating and slowing the tempo of Russia's military operations. The goal is to create friction, to make it harder for Russia to use its railways instead of making it impossible. With patience, that approach will work because Russia is struggling far more than Putin would like anybody to believe to keep his trains running. If you need evidence of that fact, a December 2024 UA Wire report revealed that the heavy weight of Western sanctions is starting to impact Russia's railways. That rail system is now in a crisis that hasn't been seen since the Soviet-era collapse, the outlet claims, as Russia is struggling to get its hands on the parts and equipment it needs to keep its aging fleet of trains running. Remember earlier that we pointed out that Russia's mainline trains have engines that are at least 20 years old. That age is a factor, especially when you consider the fact that Putin is running Russia's trains non-stop to support his war effort. Breakdowns are becoming a more common occurrence, and they are leading to a marked decline in Russia's railway freight traffic. UA Wire says that the average speed of a Russian train is now about 21 miles per hour, which is the slowest that average has been for 12 years. The amount of freight Russia is moving around is also falling. November 2024 saw a decline of 5.8% compared to the previous year, with a cumulative decline of 4% being recorded during the first 10 months of 2024. And this decline is hitting key industries, some of which support Russia's military. The black metals sector saw freight drop by 9.9%. Russia transported 14.2% less lumber, which has fallen almost 2% more since then. Building materials plummeted by 14.2%. Oil, chemical goods, cement, and grain were also affected. All of this ties into the Ukrainian strategy we mentioned earlier. Each strike on Russian rail, be it a direct hit against a train as we saw in June, or sabotage conducted by Ukraine's special forces operatives, slows Russia down. Adding sanctions to the mix makes it harder for Russia to speed back up again. It's about hurting Russian logistics to the point where Putin's troops feel the pain, which in turn relieves the pressure being placed on Ukraine's soldiers. And these problems aren't going to go away anytime soon. Beyond the sanctions issue, Russia is struggling to find the labor needed to keep its trains running. Throw in the broader demographic crisis, the loss of a huge chunk of Russia's labor force to the military, and you get repair plants running on skeleton crews, stretched thin and struggling to keep up, O'Donnell says. Each passing day of the Ukraine war only makes this labor problem worse. Le Monde reported on July 17th that Russia is already at the point where it's going to need to find 10 million more workers by 2030 as casualties mount, and the ongoing birth rate decline gets worse. Around 10.1 million Russians will also have reached retirement age by 2030, creating even more problems. These personnel problems affect every aspect of Russian industry. For its mighty rail network, they could lead to a slow demise upon which Ukraine can capitalize. Moscow can't bomb its way out of this problem, O'Donnell adds. Seasonal floods are hitting harder every year, washing out tracks and bridges. The wear and tear is relentless, and with every new storm, the infrastructure creaks a little louder, he says. Ukraine's attacks only add to the storm. Plus, Russia can't even access the software that it used in the past to keep its trains running. O'Donnell reveals that this software was provided by the German company Siemens. Germany has pulled that software support as part of its sanctions against Russia. That has forced Russia to cobble together makeshift software to keep its trains running, which presents yet more opportunities to Ukraine. After all, hastily made software is almost guaranteed to be vulnerable to electronic warfare. As Ukraine shifts its focus more intently to Russia's trains, the odds are that we're going to see far more cyber meddling being carried out that can disrupt Russia's new software. Again, it all impacts Russia's logistics, and that's the key point. Putin's decision to go all in on armored trains and Russia's rails isn't a surprise when you consider Russia's extensive history with trains. But it's indicative of a leader whose wartime strategy is still stuck in the Soviet era. Ukraine's direct attacks against these trains are already causing issues for Russia's logistics. If it starts adding electronic warfare and more sabotage into the mix, Ukraine may have just found a way to sever the Russian logistical arteries that allow Putin to continue his invasion. And Putin's supply problems may soon be getting worse. Russia has relied on China to sustain itself when Western sanctions are hitting the country hard. It may not be able to do that for much longer. The US has just warned China, cut off Russia or else. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest Ukraine war developments. And thank you, as always, for watching.